Good morning from the beautiful Arizona desert. It is colder than a witch's teat out here. I would know, mine are freezing. I'm literally dressed like the Michelin Man in a super puffy jacket. About as pale as him too. Ah! And you'll have to forgive me, I did not have the energy to do like a full-scale production this weekend, so I thought I would invite you on my morning walk if you'd like to join. We're still gonna have idea sex, a Saturday morning quickie, if you will. And the idea that I wanted to talk about is this idea that we are what we eat. I think it is so much more than that. I think it is we are what we consume. And what I mean by that is we are a product of the music we listen to, the media we watch, and the people, especially the people we surround ourselves with. Why is that? The short answer is because the human brain is freaking lazy. It is the laziest organ in the human body. It was never you. It was always just your brain. And it's because we're biologically wired to conserve energy. The brain uses a lot of energy. It sucks up glucose, like Kirby sucks up Maxim tomatoes. And as a result, it tries to expend as little energy as possible by reaching for what's easiest, what's closest, by walking the path of least resistance. And here's the thing, in the human brain, these pathways are literal pathways. They're called neural pathways, and they are what the brain establishes when we repeat a behavior enough that it becomes a habit or a pattern. And that's why people say that it takes like 30 days or 70 days or whatever to establish a habit, because that's about how long we think it takes for the brain to make this connection. And so you do something enough and it becomes like a well-worn trail, right? Like kind of like this one. And on the flip side, it's really hard to develop new habits because you're essentially taking a machete to a jungle where there is no path yet. And so our brain is always making these connections and setting up these pathways. And if we do a habit or a behavior, if we do something enough again and again, it becomes an established pathway. And once it is established, it sort of directs where our brain goes. So for example, this is why something like anxiety and depression is so hard to get out of, because by the time we're depressed, our brain has set up these pathways that just take us to the thoughts and emotions that make us feel depressed. If we're regularly anxious people, our brain sets up these pathways to that place where we imagine the worst case scenario, right? That's my favorite, where we imagine other people make certain decisions because they don't like us, where we try to predict the future. And it's not just anxiety and depression, right? It can be any pattern, any habit, behavior, good or bad. They're all associated with these pathways. But I think it's especially important to be aware of these negative ones, because those are the ones we typically want to rewire. And so the question to ask when we discover one of these negative neural pathways is, how can I add a 301 redirect? How can I add a 301 redirect? And a 301 redirect in the world of website best practices is when you have like an old, outdated web page and you don't want people visiting it anymore, but you don't want to delete a web page because it can create errors. And so what you do is you set up a redirect. And so people who try to visit that old page will be redirected to a new page with updated content, with better content, with more relevant content. And I think we can ask the same thing about our thoughts. And as someone who has historically spent a lot of time in not great headspaces, I've gotten really good at pulling myself out of them. And I found that one of the easiest ways to create a 301 redirect is when we want to pull ourselves out of a space, it makes a big difference to pay attention to what we're putting in. And this is where we come back to, we are what we consume. So I start paying really close attention to the books I'm reading, the media I'm watching, the people I'm spending time with. Because, for example, if you are a negative, cynical person and you no longer want to be a negative, cynical person, you will have a very hard time changing if you are surrounded by people who are negative and cynical. And it's funny because we like to think that our thoughts are our own, that we have control over them. But I think, are they really? Are they really our own? Because I think that when we experience a pattern or a habit, it's not always a conscious choice. Most of the time, it's the result of conditioning, of programming. It's a result of what we have been regularly exposed to. And I think people who spend a lot of time meditating or had a spiritual awakening realize that the brain is just a computer running a program. And that program is coded by, yes, the matrix, but also the things that we voluntarily expose ourselves to. I think a great example of this is politics. So on the note of conditioning, we all know people who were raised in super left-wing households or super right-wing households, and when they grow up, all they watch is MSNBC or all they watch is Fox News, and they only associate with people who watch MSNBC or Fox News. And then these people are very much, it's so ingrained in them that they are right and the other side is wrong. Those morally corrupt villains, all of them. And they will never think a single thought that is not in alignment with the belief system that they were raised in. And whenever I meet these people, I always wonder how many of their thoughts are actually their own. Like, yes, you think those thoughts, but did you choose them? Or were they given to you? Were they programmed into you? And I think we can ask those questions of pretty much any belief we hold, any pattern we find ourselves caught in, any cycle. And, with politics, that's a neutral example. I wouldn't say that that's like a negative thought pattern. It's just an example of conditioning. But to give you a real life example of a 301 redirect, both the conditioning and what I did to undo it, I'm going to give you an example of me fucking up recently. So I gotten into the habit of watching those roasting videos, which is like where comedians take usually cringy videos of people on the internet and make fun of them. And I was watching this for two reasons. One, because they're funny. And two, I thought that by watching the way really witty, quick-minded people work, I would improve my own improv. My content would be better, just through process of osmosis or whatever. And it was fine for about 2 weeks before I started to feel like shit. And I couldn't figure out why. It took me a couple days, and finally, I got still. I turned in and listened to what was going on inside of my head. And what I found is that I had created this habit of looking for reasons to make fun of people. People that I passed in real life, people online, myself. And so I was constantly in this mindset of sort of looking for things to make fun of. And that's what I didn't realize about the videos when I was watching them, right? They just seem funny, lighthearted teasing. But when you really think about it, what's going on in roasting videos is you're looking for reasons to sort of tear people apart. You do it in a funny way, which is why I think it's excusable. But I didn't realize how problematic that actually was until I started doing it and realized the effect that it was having on my headspace. And so the redirect was really simple. I stopped watching those videos and I started looking for reasons to compliment people. And it was a really easy fix. So there's a simple example. And I think for me, that really drove home the idea that we are what we consume. So, if you don't want to be a bag of dicks, don't consume a bag of... Okay, the metaphor breaks down a little, but I think you get what I'm saying. We are what we consume. And so I'm curious, what are you consuming? And how does it How do you think it affects you? Good or bad? I'd love to know. And in any case, thank you for the idea sex on this fine winter morning. I'll be back next week with normal content. Normal for me, not normal. You know what I mean? And I hope you have a blessed and beautiful week.